Hi, everyone. This is Earl Sewell, author, producer, and narrator of this podcast. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who listens, follows, and subscribes to this show. Additionally, I have some exciting news. Recently, this podcast has begun ranking on podcast charts globally. Around the world, the podcast is in the top 200, and here in the United States, it's ranked number 48 in the fiction category. I want to say thank you to everyone for supporting this podcast. If you've not done so, please share it with friends and family who you know will enjoy the show. Every bit of support helps. Speaking of support, as with all things, it takes resources to produce this show. If you'd like to support what's being done here, here's one way you can. Visit Amazon.com and purchase one of my more than 20 novels. Just go to Amazon.com and type Earl Sewell Books in the search box. You'll get a list of my books that I've written. Hopefully you'll find one that you will enjoy. Another effective way you can help support the show is to leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Those ratings and reviews really help others to find the show. Also, if you're a power listener to this podcast and you've been following it from the beginning, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your thoughts about this show, about this podcast. To do so, drop me an email with the title Lennie Gray in the subject line to earlsewellvoiceover@yahoo.com. That's EarlSewellvoiceover@yahoo.com. Once again, that's earlsewellvoiceover@yahoo.com. I would love to hear from you. Also, I'm currently recording the next audio drama. It's currently in production. At the conclusion of this episode, you can hear a preview of what's to come. I hope that you and those who mean the most to you are healthy and safe during this global pandemic. We are all in this together and must do our part to help keep not only ourselves safe, but our neighbors and our fellow global citizens too. Seriously, people, be safe out there. Now, let's get to the next episode of Lennie Gray. Katie Books Productions presents Lennie Gray, an audio drama, written, produced, and narrated by Earl Sewell. Previously on Lennie Gray. Okay, I'll go get Bud. No. Don't take Bud with you. He talks too much. This little thing you're doing is for me. I want to know what's going on, and I know that you got a good memory, and you can tell it to me, Lennie Gray said, as she pulled more clothes out of the wash to hang up. What about my chores? If I don't do them, Daddy's gonna be mad when he get back from Swan Lake with Minnie. You leave handling your father to me. Lennie Gray motioned for him to get on down the road.
This story, let us talk about the brown bomber. Joe Louis was a fighting man. Well, let us talk about the brown bomber. Tell the nation this story, let us talk about the brown bomber. Joe Louis was a fighting man. Well, now stop, let me tell you.
Later that day, Lennie Gray saw Willie sprinting down the road from the direction of town. He moved as if someone was chasing after him. When Willie reached the front porch, sweaty, thirsty, and with youth flowing through his body like a raging river, Lennie Gray waited for him to catch his breath before she started to ask him questions. "Water, Mama," Willie said, breathing heavily. He was curled forward and resting his hands on his knees. Lennie Gray called out Bud's name, and when he answered, she told him to bring a jar of pump water. Bud came running from the rear of the house with a jar, spilling most of the water before he handed it to Willie, who eagerly gulped it down. Lennie Gray had become impatient and wanted to know as much information as she could get out of Willie. What did the man say? He say, Joe Louis is going to fight that smelling man. Willie wiped the excess water from his lips with the back of his hand. Lennie Gray didn't understand fully why Sonny Boy had made such a big deal about the fight. So, what's the big deal? Smelling is a white man, Mama, Willie said. Boy, have you got heat stroke? They ain't gonna let no Negro fight a white man, that much I know. People like Mr. Bettis who run the world ain't gonna lie for that. You done heard wrong. Lennie Gray was convinced of it. She summoned him to come closer. Let me look in your ears to see how much wax done built up in them, she said. Mama, I heard right. Remember Joe Louis fought Smelling 2 years ago and lost to him. Don't you remember? A frown tugged at the corners of Lennie Gray's mouth as she tried to recall if she had heard that Smelling was a white man. Instead of admitting that she didn't know or couldn't recall, she told Willie to continue. What else he say? He told the men about Hitler, the fella that he talked about earlier, and he also talked about some place called Germany and how white folks in big cities are afraid of Hitler and something called fascism. Fascism? Lennie Gray had never heard of the word before and searched her mind for an answer to what Willie was talking about. Do you know what fascism mean, Mama? Willie asked. We don't need to know nothing about that kind of stuff. If it's got to do with white folks, it's best that we don't know too much about that part. Did he say anything else? Yeah. He talked about somebody who called himself Jim Crow. Everybody seemed to know who Jim was except for me. You know who that is? I knows who it is, and so do you, Lennie Gray reminded him. I ain't never heard of nobody named Jim Crow. Willie searched his mind. Let me put it to you like this here. Remember how your daddy showed you the letter W and told you never to go any place that has that letter on it? Yeah, I remember. Well, that be Jim Crow. Lennie Gray smiled painfully, but Willie didn't fully understand. The sign be Jim Crow? Willie asked once he gave what his mother told him some thought. That's right. That sign is a person, and you need to always remember that. You step out of line, and Jim Crow's gonna come to life, and when he do, he gonna be as mean as a possum. But how can I say... Willie, stop asking so many questions, boy. Ain't no need of you going around getting curious about too many things. Your life is gonna be right here on this here farm. All you really need to know is that as long as you stay around here, Jim Crow ain't gonna bother you all that much. Oh, I should have never sent you down there to listen to that man. Just forget everything he said. If you don't know nothing, can't nothing happen to you. Lennie Gray didn't relish the idea of having to tell him, but it was for his own safety. Willie had to be socialized to the way the world worked.
Goodness gracious alive. Say, man, did you finally arrive? Hey, let's go, Joe. Ain't nothing to it but the so-and-so. Hey, let's go, Joe. Knock me something, 'cause I'm ready to go. Hey, so, Joe.
On June 22nd, 1938, America and the world prepared for the Joe Louis fight against Max Schmeling. Every downtrodden poor black American placed their hopes on the shoulders of Joe Louis because they needed him to win. They needed to show America that a black man was more than a second-class citizen. The fight had become political because America had begun to recognize the evils of Nazi Germany, and because many white Americans accepted Joe Louis as an emblem of America and freedom. Only the hardened racist, like Mr. Bettis, wanted Joe Louis to lose. Lennie Gray was the first to see Mr. Bettis driving down the road as she and countless others walked out of the fields towards their shanties. The very sight of his car always made her stomach turn sour. Once Curly, her, and the kids made it to their shanty, they went inside and closed the door. They hadn't been there long before they heard the sound, of a car horn.
Curly, Lennie, y'all get on out here.
Lennie Gray looked at Curly nervously. "What do you think he wants?" Lennie Gray asked. Curly swallowed hard and shrugged his shoulders. Probably just wants some moonshine or something, but I ain't got none, no," he said, loathing the idea of having to open the door with a phony smile. Curly did it anyway and stepped outside. Curly nodded his head as a way of saying hello with body language. Curly noticed that J.W. Millam, Roy Bryant, and several men were standing with Mr. Bettis. All of them, including Mr. Bettis, were armed with shotguns and pistols. Curly thought about getting his own pistol out of the house, but it would not have mattered because Mr. Bettis didn't allow Negroes to buy bullets anymore.
Tell Lennie Gray and all them dust bunnies y'all have made to come on out here so that we can see them. I want them to hear me,
Mr. Bettis ordered Curly. Curly felt powerless as he shamefully looked over his shoulder and called out the names of his family members. Lennie, Willie, Bud, Minnie, y'all come on out here, and bring Roosevelt too. Curly positioned them so that they were close to him.
You don't have any type of self-control, do you, boy? You just keep pumping and she just keeps spitting them out. I like you, Curly.
Mr. Bettis laughed at Curly, along with the other 4 men. This here's my family, sir, Curly humbly said. They all I got.
I can see that. How many more do you plan on having?
Mr. Bettis reached into his pocket and removed a piece of peppermint candy. Don't know.
Do you have another one on the way, Lennie?
Mr. Bettis asked. I don't think so, Lennie Gray answered, self-consciously.
How is it that you don't know if you're carrying or not?
Mr. Bettis had shifted his weight from one foot to the other. You know that coons don't know nothing, Will. These people are mongrels and have been cursed by God, just like it says in the Bible, blurted out Roy Bryant, who was in the passenger side of the vehicle.
Ain't that the truth?
Mr. Bettis agreed with Roy. Lennie Gray and Curly instantly felt as if they were standing on unsteady legs. Their children didn't know what to make of what was being heard. Lennie Gray thought that perhaps someone told Mr. Bettis that Sonny Boy Williamson had come by and told her about fascism, which was something that she should not have known about.
All right, is this all of them, Curly?
Mr. Bettis pointed his finger at everyone. Yes, sir. Curly's throat felt as dry as desert sand.
I come by to tell everybody that's got a radio not to listen to the Joe Louis fight. I personally think that the country has gone from sugar to shit, and it's a shame any time we have to send a coon as a symbol of our strength.
It's a goddamn disgrace is what it is, blurted out Roy.
Now, I happen to like you, Curly. You don't cause no trouble at all. But listening to things like the fight might put bad ideas in your head that don't belong there,
said Mr. Bettis, who knew he had a strong influence over Curly's mind. When you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. You don't have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You don't need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his own special benefit. We ain't got no radio, Mr. Bettis. We ain't got nothing except these few rags on our backs.
And that's the way it should be. You see, boys?
Mr. Bettis turned to address the men he was riding with.
I told you, Curly's a good boy and keeps to himself. He don't want nothing out of life. He's happy and content. And he can't tell the difference between dog shit and horse shit. He's completely socialized and has done us the good favor of socializing his children. If this were 1839, hell, fellas, this here would have been my prized buck and he would have made me happy.
Curly felt rage growing inside of him. He loathed the words coming from Mr. Bettis and wanted to show his anger. He wanted to be recognized as a man, and he didn't want his children to hear the mean things that were being said, but there was nothing he could do to stop it.
Well, it ain't 1839 no more, and we need to let these coons know that we ain't for no Joe Louis winning no fight, and he ain't no symbol of goddamn America,
grunted Roy.
Curly, stay in the house tonight. If Max Schmeling wins, there won't be no trouble. I can't say the same if Joe Louis wins. You and your family don't want to be caught outside if he does. You understand me, boy?
Yes, sir, Curly answered.
Good. Lennie, y'all have a nice evening, and be ready to go out in the field in the morning.
Mr. Bettis spit on the ground before he got back in his car along with the other men and drove away. Lennie Gray felt as shrunken as Curly as she obediently went back inside.
Why do white peoples hate Joe Louis so much?
Minnie asked Lennie Gray. They just do, honey.
I hate that dirty motherfucker,
Curly remarked as he knuckled up his hand into fist.
I hope Joe Louis knocks the fuck out of Max Schmeling.
So do I, Daddy, Willie chimed in.
Me too,
Bud followed with his stammer. Since when did you start caring about what's going on in the outside world? Lennie Gray asked Curly.
I don't know. All of a sudden, I just do. We've been on this bear plantation for 20 years, Lennie, and we ain't doing no better than when we got here. I'm getting old, Lennie, and I'm getting tired of losing. For once in my life, I would like to hear about somebody that looked like me win at something in life.
Why, Curly, in all my born days, I never thought I would ever hear you say that you wanted more than this out of life.
This is all I want. I just want it without being messed with.
Carmen swiveled her wrist to glance at her wristwatch as she shuffled up the steps of Nikki's apartment building. It was 6 a.m. on Saturday, and the Chicago air was already heavy with sweaty humidity. I hate this sticky, clammy weather, Carmen complained, as she wiped perspiration from her forehead and the base of her neck. Nikki had better have her behind out of bed, Carmen muttered, as she noticed a peculiar, scruffy-looking man exiting the brick building. The man was wearing a green t-shirt and cut-off blue jean shorts with black grime stains on the thighs. The grungy man had a face that only a mother could love and reminded Carmen of the scrawny rock and roll icon Mick Jagger. As Carmen approached the entrance, he held the door open for her. "Thank you," she whispered as she eased by him and walked over and pressed a silver button on the wall to call for the elevator. She stared mindlessly at the orange elevator light, paused on the 8th floor. She sighed impatiently, then turned around to look out a nearby window while she mulled over her thoughts. Carmen was disillusioned with the fact that Nikki wasn't doing anything useful with her life. Her baby sister had a day job at an adult bookstore as a peep show girl and an evening job as a stripper at a seedy gentleman's club. Their parents had to be turning over in their graves, knowing that Nikki was making a living exposing her body to men old enough to be her grandfather. That wasn't the way either of them were raised. Yeah, Carmen whispered to herself as she continued to glance out the window. Nicky's life is dreadful, in my opinion. Carmen shouldered much of the blame for Nicky's appalling lifestyle, and the guilt she toted around was a heavy burden on her heart. Carmen continually attempted to clear the unspoken tension between her and her sister, but reconciling with Nicky was turning out to be a monumental task. Their mother had passed away years ago from a combination of cancer and being a perpetual worrywart. 2 years later, their father, Anthony, died. At the time of his death, Carmen was 21 years old and became guardian of her then 15-year-old sister, Nicky. The untimely loss of their father was the root of the tension between them. Nicky blamed Carmen for the death of their father, and she knew it, although Nicky hadn't verbalized it as much lately. Blame and guilt were parasites eating away at Carmen's soul, and she was tired of toting around her baggage of unhappy feelings. Carmen exhaled, hoping the shift in her breathing pattern would rid her mind of the unwanted and haunting thoughts. She turned back around to check the progress of the elevator and noticed that the scrawny man who had held the door for her was still hovering around the doorway, glaring at her. He licked his lips, flicked his tongue at her a few times, sounding like a dog slurping water, and brushed his fingers across the stubble on his chin. Carmen translated the glint in his lustful eyes and realized he was having a sexual fantasy about her in his mind. "Go to hell!" Carmen snarled at him as she flipped up her middle finger. "Damn weirdo." The man didn't seem to mind Carmen's harsh words because he continued to glare at her. "Nicky has got to stop moving into these apartment buildings filled with freaks and crackpots," she muttered as the bell on the elevator chimed. Carmen stepped inside of the elevator and pressed the third-floor button. When she got off the elevator, she noticed that the hallway carpet was wet. She wrinkled her nose because the musty and moldy odor was overpowering. She moved quickly down the enclosed corridor toward Nicky's apartment. Curling her fingers into a fist, Carmen drummed on the door with her knuckles. A short moment later, Frida, Nicky's roommate, answered the door. "Hey, Frida," Carmen greeted politely, as Frida allowed her access to their small, cluttered, 2-bedroom apartment. The place was littered with piles of laundry that needed to either be cleaned or folded, but Carmen couldn't tell which. "Is Nicky out of bed yet?" Carmen asked, crinkling her nose while comparing the untidiness of the apartment to Nicky and Frida's chaotic and messy lifestyle. "Why are you already asking a question you know the answer to?" Frida scraped her fingernails up and down her belly before releasing a loud yawn that assaulted the already stale air with the rotting smell of her morning breath. "You know damn well Nicky and I are like vampires and only function after the sun goes down." Carmen tried to inconspicuously cover her nose with the palm of her hand. Frida's breath literally smelled like spoiled food, and its foul odor was making her dizzy. "Well, she's the one who told me to be here this early. I've got to drop my car off at the repair shop, and she promised me that she would drive over there with me so I wouldn't have to sit there and wait while the mechanic worked on my car." Yeah, Frida answered as she scratched the side of her neck. "She told me all about it. I think she would have left work a little earlier, but this older dude walked into the tavern and started paying her some attention. And you know how Nicky has a soft spot for older men." "I know," Carmen answered. She wasn't giving her full attention to what Frida said because she didn't want their conversation to last longer than necessary. The only thing she wanted her to do was to stop talking. Carmen sauntered into the kitchen area and inspected a banana sitting on the countertop. After checking it thoroughly for bruising, she decided that it appeared safe enough to eat. "He was a nice-looking man, too," Frida continued, to Carmen's annoyance. "He looked like he used to play football or something. You know, the type that probably has a large stash of money hidden somewhere?" "Mm-hmm," Carmen answered coyly, hoping that Frida picked up that she didn't want to continue their conversation. Carmen noticed a chair that wasn't cluttered with clothes positioned in a corner of the room. She decided to sit down and wait for her sister. You don't seem like you're in a talkative mood. But then again, you never are. I'm going back to my room. Besides, Francisco came over early this morning and gave me some grown man loving. My body trembles just thinking about having my ass in the air while he sucks on my sweet, juicy Spanish punani. Carmen could not have cared less about Frida's sex life, and if her pussy was as funky as her breath, Francisco had to be one nasty motherfucker to put his face anywhere near her smelly ass. Yeah, whatever. You're telling me way too much information, Carmen said, and began to leave. She was glad Frida was taking her body funk back into the bedroom. There's no need to be jealous, honey. Oh, Lord, here we go, Carmen thought. Now she thinks I'm being insulting. You and your stuck-up attitude will get a man to fuck you right one of these days. Hopefully, he'll be able to mellow you out some. How long has it been now since that no-good professor dumped you? What, 9 years? Or is it 10? Frida snickered. He had your head all messed up when he canceled the wedding on you after you spent all of your money planning this elaborate event, which you specifically told me that I wasn't invited to. I still haven't forgotten that evil shit. I'm glad he cracked your prissy little face and left you all broken up. You needed to be taught a lesson. Frida used threatening hand gestures to emphasize her point. Frida, it's too damn early in the morning to dig up old shit and start a fight with me. I didn't come over here for that. Carmen was more than willing to bare her claws and stir up an ugly argument if Frida didn't back down. Trust me, you do not want to toy with me this morning. Frida chuckled. You don't scare me, honey. Not one bit. Frida said her piece and then made her way down the narrow corridor to the bedrooms. She banged hard on Nikki's bedroom door. Your snooty-ass sister is here, Frida said, loud enough for Carmen to hear. The animosity between Frida and Carmen was like a knife in her back that she couldn't reach. In fact, as Carmen saw it, Frida was a part of the reason that her relationship with Nikki was so sour at times.